This is In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. The caffeine is still surging through my veins, so let's get this going before I crash, shall we? Tonight we look into a string of federal executions planned by the Trump administration for its final days in office. Then, landmark legislation on weed comes to Congress, but we respect you too much to make a pot pun here. But first, here's what you need to know right now. The US just hit a record daily COVID death toll, surpassing the spring peak, and experts say Americans need to keep their guard up and take precautions with some dark days still to come.
What we were worried about in the spring was access to ventilators and to PPE. What we're worried about now is actually beds and healthcare providers.
We know we throw a lot of numbers at y'all when it comes to the pandemic, but we wanted to try and put some of this in perspective for you. On September 11th, 2001, 2,977 people were killed in terrorist attacks in New York, Washington, and Pennsylvania. On Wednesday, 2,760 Americans died because of the coronavirus. 2,473 people died the day before on Tuesday. Just let that sink in. What's even more worrisome, when we hit our peak back in April, it was a sobering moment. Shortly after, we saw a decline in deaths and hospitalizations, but this time around, the trends look different. For one, the virus is peaking in way more places than it did in the spring, and health experts say delayed effects from Thanksgiving travel will likely make it even worse in the coming weeks.
This has been more of a slow rise over a period of the last month or two than it was a flood like we saw in March and April. But there's really no indication that it's stopping right now.
Now, some good news. A publicly available COVID-19 vaccine is one step closer to becoming a reality in the US. On Friday, states will submit their distribution plans to the Centers for Disease Control to approve. Earlier this week, the CDC put out guidelines on who should get the vaccine first. Many state officials have said they plan to follow the federal recommendations. But how is the general population feeling about taking the vaccine? Remember, public health experts have said at least 60 to 70% of the population would need to get the vaccine to actually achieve herd immunity. And to encourage people to get it when they can, a few former commanders-in-chief are stepping up in the fight against COVID-19.
I promise you that when it's then made for people who are less at risk, I will be taking it, and I may end up taking it on TV or having it filmed just so that people know.
And Obama isn't the only one. Former Presidents George W. Bush and Bill Clinton also said they are willing to get the vaccine on camera to help make sure Americans view it as safe and effective. If you have an emotional support pet, they may not be allowed to fly with you the next time you take to the skies. The Department of Transportation approved a new rule that defines a service animal to be specifically a dog that is individually trained to do work or perform tasks for the benefit of a person with a disability. The Americans with Disabilities Act defines emotional support animals more as companions for comfort or therapy. Some people really benefit from them, but critics argue it's become too easy to obtain a certificate to avoid paying fees or to get special permission to bring the creatures along. A for-profit website that lets you register an emotional support animal has nearly 215,000 registrations. Of course, there are some folks out there who are genuinely impacted by this decision, but I'm sure flight attendants are breathing sighs of relief that they won't need to worry about ponies, peacocks, or pigs showing up on their flights, and yes, those are all things that have actually happened. President Trump is on his way out of the White House, but he isn't leaving before setting a record. He's planning to carry out the largest federal execution spree by any administration in American history, with the next execution scheduled 1 week from now. Newsy's Jamal Andrus tells us about the person scheduled to be executed and gives us some context on this milestone.
Between now and the end of President Donald Trump's term, his administration plans to execute 5 federal prisoners, setting a deadly record for the administration and creating a controversial political precedent.
There has been no administration in American history, going back to before the United States was the United States. There was no administration in American history that has carried out 6 executions during a transition period between presidencies.
There had been no federal executions for 17 years before the Trump administration restarted the practice on July 14th. Since then, the Trump administration has carried out 7 more lethal injections, with 5 more scheduled before President-elect Joe Biden is sworn in, including the first woman in nearly 70 years. That will be the largest string of federal executions by any administration in American history.
This is an administration that has used the Department of Justice as a political weapon. The way it's approached the death penalty just as a further example of that.
The next scheduled execution is Brandon Bernard on December 10th. Bernard was convicted for the kidnapping and killing of 2 Texas youth ministers. While Bernard has never denied his involvement, his legal team says he never shot anyone and didn't intend on killing anyone.
He was just an accomplice. He was not present for the majority of the crime. He was not present for the carjacking. He was not present for the robbery. He was not the shooter.
Since Bernard was put on death row, 5 of the 9 jurors who voted for execution in the original case have submitted letters saying they no longer believe the death sentence is appropriate. And since an execution date was scheduled for Bernard, one of the prosecutors who argued his guilt in court published an op-ed pleading for Bernard's life. Bernard's case has also caught the public's attention. More than 75,000 people have submitted letters asking for the president to commute Bernard's sentence, and Kim Kardashian asked for his life to be spared on Twitter. Despite the outpouring of support, the execution is scheduled to proceed and his legal team is running out of options.
It's an uphill battle. I mean, we're asking the President of the United States to commute Brandon's death sentence to a sentence of life without parole. We think we have the facts and the mitigation and the law behind us for President Trump to do that, but it is an uphill battle.
If Bernard is granted a stay, he may be able to avoid execution when the new administration takes office. President-elect Biden has mentioned in the past he wants to get rid of the death penalty at the federal level. As for the Trump administration, a DOJ official told the Washington Post, quote, "This has nothing to do with who's coming into power. It shouldn't be a Republican or Democrat thing, it's the law."
It is out of step with American norms, it's out of step with American values, and it's out of step with the general civility that we tend to see when one administration moves out of office and another one comes in.
According to the Death Penalty Information Center, for every 8.5 people who are executed, 1 person is wrongfully convicted, wrongfully sent to death row, and then exonerated. Jamal Andrews, Newsy, Chicago.
We're going to take a quick break. When you're back, we'll give you a few notes to help you connect with the gamers in your life. Our Newsy original series, Next Level, is known for plugging us into the world of video games and how they're reshaping technology and culture. Tonight, we're going to hit one of those superstars from the Mario franchise and zip through some gaming news in something we're calling Next Level Speedrun, starting with this. It's sort of a cruel thing to announce when we're all in lockdown, but Universal Studios Japan has just given its Super Mario-based theme park a new opening date. Here we go! The new attraction is called Super Nintendo World, and it features a lot of the characters and locations that pop up in the Mario franchise. Attendees can get the full Mario experience by punching yellow blocks like they stole something to collect digital coins in an app. They can also try out a real-life Mario Kart ride, which will presumably feature less blue shell-based heartache than the video game. Super Nintendo World was initially slated to open in the summer of 2020 alongside the Olympics. Obviously, the pandemic had other ideas. Now the theme park is planning its grand opening on February 4th of 2021, with as many social distancing rules in place as is possible in a big tourist attraction. The Nintendo theme park is currently a Japan exclusive, but Universal is planning to bring similar attractions to its park in Hollywood. No word on if Waluigi will be making an appearance in either park.
I've been gathering the greatest hunters across all realities, and I started with the best.
I guess this is the way now. Popular multiplayer shooter Fortnite has just brought in a ringer for its newest season. Din Djarin, better known as the Mandalorian from the Disney Plus series of the same name. Mando is joining a cast of non-playable bounty hunters for hire that'll be scattered around Fortnite's revamped map. Players can recruit these hunters to their side by completing little side quests for them during the match. They can also pick a fight with these characters if they're feeling lucky. Fortnite is no stranger to Disney crossovers. It wrapped up its previous Marvel-based season with a battle against the planet-eating supervillain Galactus.
Wow, that is really beautiful. Also really bad.
It's cool Fortnite maker Epic Games is making the most of its collaboration with Disney, and since the game reports around 350 million registered users, Disney's probably pretty happy with the partnership as well.
This better work.
One of 2020's most anticipated games, Cyberpunk 2077, is coming out next week. Allegedly.
It's a city of dreams. And I'm a big dreamer.
The long-awaited Cyberpunk 2077 is scheduled for a December 10th release date, and developers CD Projekt Red are teasing the game's photo mode ahead of launch. The option lets you pause the game and cycle through camera angles, poses, and filters to find the perfect snapshot of your big action moment. Cyberpunk has attracted a lot of buzz since it was first announced in 2012. The developers previously made the critically acclaimed Witcher franchise. Cyberpunk's pre-release marketing promised tons of flashy graphics, gripping stories, and gratuitous amounts of Keanu Reeves.
Looking for a shock to the system? Yeah.
Duh.
But repeated delays and reports about the grueling working conditions behind the scenes have cast a shadow over the game's release. We won't know until launch whether the game managed to deliver on its ambitious promises. But hey, we've got our bionic fingers crossed. The House of Representatives is set to take up a bill that would deschedule cannabis, removing it from the Controlled Substances Act. That's a federal drug policy that classifies substances based on potential for abuse or addiction and medical usage. The bill, known as the Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment and Expungement, or MORE Act, would go a long way in sorting out state and federal weed laws and could lead to the expungement of certain convictions. Newsy's Kellen Howell explains.
The House of Representatives on Friday is set to vote for the first time on a bill to legalize marijuana at the federal level. Advocates are calling the Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment and Expungement Act, or MORE Act, the most sweeping marijuana reform bill yet.
When you acknowledge the fact that the war on marijuana, the war on drugs, has intentionally and really sweepingly impacted communities and individuals, it's only right that the measures that are, rolling those bad policies back are as comprehensive as the harm that we know people have experienced.
The MORE Act removes marijuana from the list of federally controlled illegal substances and expunges criminal records of those with marijuana-related federal convictions. It establishes a federal tax on legal weed sales that will fund grant programs to reinvest in communities impacted by high arrest rates and prison time for marijuana offenses. It would also help states add diversity to the cannabis industry by opening it up to those convicted of pot offenses, as well as women and people of color. The legislation does not make pot legal for purchase nationwide. States still have to legalize and establish their own markets. The vote comes on the heels of a tumultuous season of civil unrest over racial injustice and an election that saw 4 new states vote to legalize cannabis. It's the first time a full chamber of Congress will vote on a bill to legalize pot.
I'm really grateful to see, and at the moment when Congress is a mess, that Congress actually is able to take the steps necessary to have, the House, a chamber of Congress finally acknowledge that, criminalization of marijuana was wrong and it's bad policy.
The House is expected to pass the bill, but its future in a Republican-controlled Senate is bleak. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell staunchly opposes marijuana reform. He championed hemp legalization, but often refers to cannabis as hemp's illicit cousin. This week, McConnell criticized House Democrats for prioritizing marijuana reform over a new coronavirus aid package.
The House of Representatives is spending this week on pressing issues like marijuana. Serious and important legislation benefiting the national crisis.
But it could get a boost from the White House. Vice President-elect Kamala Harris sponsored the Senate version of the bill and has advocated for federal marijuana legalization.
First of all, let me just make the statement very clear. I believe we need to legalize marijuana.
Although President-elect Joe Biden has not been on board with legalization efforts, advocates are hopeful that as president, Biden will be open to change on federal drug policy.
I'm hoping that his selection of Vice President-elect Harris, it means that he would be open to moving on this issue and open to hearing her understanding and grappling of the way that this issue is a racial justice issue, is an economic justice issue.
Kellen Howell, Newsy, Washington.
Tracking COVID infection rates is valuable, but what if we could predict where cases may increase? Health officials around the world have gotten pretty good at tracking COVID-19 infection rates. That's something that's helped us visualize the scope of infections, especially as we've seen increases here in the States. But what if we could predict infection rates? National reporter Jessica Perez tells us about how 2 universities in the US are doing just that by teaming up with a social media giant.
A very important thing to have with COVID, since especially in the spring, we were relying on testing infrastructure, which was having a lot of difficulties. And they realized, well, if we could know when people are experiencing symptoms, they probably experience symptoms a few days before they go see a doctor. That's probably a few days before they get test results back. And so that could potentially be an early indicator.
Dr. Alex Reinhardt is an assistant teaching professor of statistics and data science at Carnegie Mellon University and a member of the Delphi Group, which is analyzing COVID-19 information. The group reached out to Facebook, which agreed to help them survey its users.
How does it work exactly?
So what happens is every day Facebook takes a random sample of their active users that day in the United States and internationally, and invites them through a little blurb at the top of the newsfeed saying, you can help coronavirus research if you take this survey, which is voluntary.
Once Facebook users click on the survey button, it takes them to Carnegie Mellon's page for the survey. University of Maryland also jumped on board with the project, conducting the survey for all international Facebook users. Facebook does not receive any survey data and only refers interested participants to the survey links. So far, more than 30 million people have taken the survey. Dr. Frauke Kruder, who's working with the University of Maryland in Germany on the international side of this survey, says she's not aware of another global survey on COVID-19.
There are 2 factors globally, I would say. One is that many countries do not have good reporting systems, and so they rely even more on alternative data sources. And the other one is you want to compare yourself to other countries, but for that you need to have kind of the same measure in each country. And that's what we're lacking with a lot of measures right now, because each country does their reporting slightly different.
So far, the 2 universities have been able to develop these heat maps showing coronavirus symptoms across the country and world. Dr. Reinhardt says they've been on par with COVID-19 infection rates being reported from health officials and have helped them identify patterns when it comes to mask wearing and infection rates.
So for instance, in early September, we started asking questions about mask usage. And we soon found that there is a striking difference in mask usage across the country, at least at the time. And places that had lower mask usage, seem to be having a worse time in the pandemic.
Dr. Reinhardt says the survey results are helping them learn more about the effects of mask mandates. Researchers are hoping to be able to continue the survey and adjust it as new COVID-19 information comes out. For example, questioning people about a possible COVID-19 vaccine and whether they plan on taking it. The data is available for anyone to look at and use.
It's different from what you could get from cell phone mobility data that we see people use, because we get to directly ask people what they're thinking, how they're feeling, what they're experiencing. And so we'd like as many people as possible to discover this data and use it for their own important research questions.
Hoping to bring new understanding and possibly a different view to this ongoing pandemic. I'm Jessica Paris reporting.
If you haven't done so already, feel free to give us a shout on Twitter using the hashtag #NewsyInTheLoop. It allows us to directly connect with y'all. Now, if you try that on any other platform, your messages are just going to be lumped in with posts from my siblings, so don't do that. After the killing of Breonna Taylor, protesters recycled a popular refrain to ensure that her death would not be forgotten. Say her name. Black women like Taylor are killed by police at a disproportionately high rate. But aside from Taylor, all the highest profile cases are unknown to most of the public and often overlooked by media. Our new series, Data Log, unpacks data journalism through conversations on a range of hot-button topics. In this episode, Newsy's Alex Travis examines the numbers that show even during a wave of protests for racial justice this year, we still don't say her name.
Police brutality and race are at the center of some of the biggest conversations happening across the U.S.
Marches and calls for justice over police-involved incidents involving black men.
Protests across the country over videos showing the deaths of black men at the hands of police.
So often, black men are vilified.
But often left out of that conversation are black women who, like black men, are killed by police at a disproportionately high rate. And we found that the highest profile police killings of black women in recent years only got about 8% of the coverage that killings of black men received. These numbers shed some light on how we still don't say her name, and they show that whether the victim is a man or a woman, the big factor in police violence is still race.
My name is Katrina Johnson. I am the first cousin of Charlena Lyles. On June 18, 2017, my cousin called the police for help to report a burglary. And the dash cam video shows the officers, she was killed. She was shot 7 times. At the most, she had a paring knife. And so even if that was the case, why was the result death?
Victims of police violence like Charlena are real people with real stories. So, take a minute. Which of these names do you recognize? These are all names of high-profile victims of police violence. But through a Newsy Ipsos survey, we found that some names are more recognizable than others. Overall, people are much less familiar with the victims on this list who are women. And most people say they haven't heard anything at all about the highest profile cases of black women killed by police, aside from Breonna Taylor. To understand why, we took a closer look at how these cases are covered. And to do that, we enlisted the help of Newsy data reporter Rosie Chima. Hi, Rosie. Thanks for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Hi, Alex. Yeah, thanks for including me.
So yeah, we used the Say Her Name campaign and a report that they published in a big way to kind of look into their main focus of what kind of coverage are black female victims of police violence receiving. So we went through those 5 of the most trafficked news outlets and compared their coverage of black female victims post-Ferguson to 9 very well-known male victims from that same time period.
Yeah, and based on the number of articles that they appeared in, Breonna Taylor and Sandra Bland were by far the most well-known women on our list. Before this year, it was almost definitely Sandra Bland. She died in police custody in 2015. And we found almost 900 stories that mentioned her. But before this year, the most well-known male victim was Michael Brown, and there were 7,000 stories that mentioned him.
That is a huge disparity.
Also now the most well-known victim of police violence in the world, maybe of all time, is George Floyd. And his name appears in over 9,000 stories. And if we add up the 21 most well-known female victims in our data set, they appear in about 2,500 stories. And when you compare 9,000 to 2,500, that means that all of those female victims together got less than 1/3 as much coverage than a single male victim.
Research shows that if we look at gender and race together, Black women are the group who are most likely to be killed by police when unarmed of any group, including Black men. And that illuminates kind of how deeply entrenched perceptions of Black women as inherently dangerous, deranged, threatening, animalistic.
And that impacts people when they are being policed, in addition to how
police officers see Black spaces. So I think there's this perception of who Black women are and the types of spaces that they reside in also are often criminalized. Police violence against Black women since the 1980s has gotten worse.
Drugs are menacing our society. They're threatening our values and undercutting our institutions. They're killing our children.
The folks that are largely impacted by those drug rates tend to be Black women and their children.
I'm laying there screaming, asking somebody to help my granddaughter because he just shot her in the head.
The case of Ayanna Stanley in Detroit, she was shot in the head by Detroit police officers because of a raid. And this is what we see in the Breonna Taylor case, right? You see the police actually just going in, kicking a door in and not asking any types of questions.
Everybody there said they never heard the police identify themselves.
And then the folks who are in that house are not expected to protect themselves.
I was just wondering what it's been like for you and your family since Charlena was killed.
To be perfectly honest, it has been an absolute nightmare. It's been 3 years and we don't even really know what happened, why it had to happen, and what you could have done differently. How do you heal? How do you move on? How do you begin to pick up the pieces of your life, knowing that it's already never going to be the same?
That's it for us, gang. As always, thanks for watching. We'll be back with more in the Loop Monday, same time, same place. While we're away, remember to drink water, wash your masks, and if I might add, it's never a bad idea to ask people before you can jump on an elevator with them. More top stories from Newsy are headed your way right now.